All right, so we have more people joining in. We'll wait for a minute before we start. So welcome to Get Set Up special event, learning with leaders. And today we're going to talk to Eric Rice, who's a dear friend, but also, the head of impact at BlackRock. So my name is Neil. I am the co-founder of Get Set Up, and I'll be your host today. A little bit about Get Set Up before we start. We are a community of active older adults who are looking to stay informed, share their skills with each other. And we are a global platform with over 1 million learners today. So we are really thrilled to have Eric join us. Tell us a little bit about impact investing, how it relates to a lot of our learners in our community. And then a little bit about his story, about how he started his journey when he turned 60. So before I get started, for those tuning in live in Zoom, please remember to mute yourself during the session. But do keep your cameras on because it's great to look at each other. It gives a sense of community and connection. If you have any questions for Eric, we'll be taking all of that on the chat. So please put it in there. No question is a bad question. We'll try to address a lot of them if possible, if we have time, or later even through email. And for those who are actually watching us on Get Set Up TV, as well as on Facebook and YouTube, you're welcome to enter questions into comments and we'll try to address them too. So to get started, we have a guest speaker, Eric. He is the head of impact investing at BlackRock. He is actually the architect of the world's first public market impact investing strategy called Global Impact. And we'll cover a lot about what that means because it's a lot of jargon. But what Global Impact does, and I think it's really cool, is invest in companies whose goods and services help address the world's great problems. And we'll cover some examples of it. For me, that was actually an eye-opener because I've always thought of impact investing done in startups like Get Set Up, right? Who have a mission to do good in the world, but also, become sustainable. But what Eric did was actually create one for the public market so everybody can participate in investing in such companies. Eric also, previously worked at World Bank as an economist and diplomat in Rwanda with the Department of State. So that's actually where he got his ideas, I think so. Eric earned a PhD in economics from Harvard and an AB degree in economics from University of California at Berkeley. And he lives in San Francisco. That's how I know Eric. So Eric, welcome to Get Set Up. And thanks for being
Neil.
here. Yeah.
Thank you. Good to be here. Hi, everybody.
So Eric, let's get started. So I know I gave a brief introduction. Is there anything else I missed about your long and amazing life and career that got you here?
Well, maybe about the motivation to work in impact investing, which was I had been doing this work in economic development a long time ago. Then found myself as an investor, which was also intellectually very interesting, but I wanted to bring together both what was good for the world and what was efficient for the world. And that's what impact investing did. And impact investing a decade ago, when I was looking at that, was all in the private markets, like what you've done, and social entrepreneurship, like what you've done here. And I asked myself, one, why should it be that you have to have $1 million of liquid assets to be an impact investor? If I want to invest in doing good, I should be able to do it with $100. And that's in the public markets. And the other thing is, we've gotten quantified the size of the problems that we have. Reaching the Paris Climate Accord goals for the world is a challenge it's estimated $3 trillion a year. And reaching the end of hunger and poverty, all the social issues, is estimated to be $2.5 trillion a year. Well, the private markets are a fraction of that, a tiny fraction. So you have to figure out how can you do this at scale, and so get small scale investors and then large scale of the deployment of capital towards solving the world's biggest issues. And that's what we wanted to do.
Thanks for sharing that. So for someone who thinks of investing just as the stock market and, probably calling your broker or using an app to put maybe a couple of $100 or maybe even their pensions, could you explain what impact investing really is? And maybe how is it different from regular investing?
It's the same and it's different. So it's the same because the team is a team of professional investors. So just like anything you have your pension in or your whatever mutual funds you might hold, I mean, our investments are mutual funds. And our investors, the team that I lead, is a team that was trained to be conventional investors. But what we do is in the same way as you might have a fund that invests only in smaller companies or in companies in Europe. Well, we only invest in companies that have been identified as problem solvers, as these companies that are solving social issues and environmental issues. So we're seeking to earn that, to be market beating, to what we refer to as an alpha return over what the market return is, just like everyone else who does that at BlackRock. But it's a certain unusual set of companies that are the public health companies or the affordable housing companies or the financial inclusion companies or pollution companies. It's just a different set that we invest from. And there's plenty of profitability there and plenty of diversification across all of these. So it's actually mostly similar. But if you look at what our portfolio looks like, if you open the prospectus or your annual report, if you hold our thing, you say, oh, wow, that's really different. People like to show it to their kids to say, this is something different that we're doing with our family's money.
Oh, cool. Could you share, Eric, maybe examples of companies or stories of founders that you have invested in that do this, maybe a couple of examples of that?
Sure. So it's all over the map. But some of those I like best are, for instance, there's this interesting thing it's a terrible thing that happens in Brazil. In Brazil, there's a free university system, excellent public university system, but you have to test into it. And the only people who can pass those tests are those who've gone to the elite private schools for elementary and high school. So nobody middle class would get into them, to that free education. And therefore, a private university system has emerged that's very low cost, that's geared to especially people who are already in the workforce, especially to women, especially to lower income people, so they too can get those vocational education and academic education. And they're profitable, but they offer an education at what looks like a pittance to us in the US. There's so many interesting stories. There's a company that looks at the fact that in Japan, there are small towns all over the country that are depopulating. So kind of ask the question, well, how do you stop these towns from collapsing? And what do you do with all the houses people leave behind? Everybody wants to leave the small town and move to Tokyo, right? And so there are literally millions of these abandoned houses. They look like what you'd expect, kind of falling apart, rice paper houses. And what this company does is it buys them from the next generation who isn't interested in it, inexpensively rehabilitates it, and then sells it to first-time home buying families at a fraction of the cost of renting an apartment. And so in doing that, it stops the depopulation, it revives those towns, and it gives low-cost housing. The inventiveness across every area is so awe-inspiring.
Well, no, this is exciting. Also, I mean, I remember you mentioned that y'all were investors in even something related to Alzheimer's. Can you tell us a little bit more?
Well, this week it was very exciting. The story that many of us were paying attention to this week was the breakthrough drug that a number of companies, I mean, a small number of companies were involved in collaboratively. And one of them is ours. And so it was a profitable outcome for the fund, but also a really inspiring moment when you realize you could get that kind of breakthrough that's been so elusive for decades. And we don't know if it's the end of the story, but it certainly is the first time that anyone really has significant hope about a slowing, or not a reversal yet, but a significant slowing of the path of Alzheimer's. So we bet on it happening. We bet on this being the solution, and we've actually owned that stock for several years through ups and downs, and finally we got the breakthrough.
Oh, that's great. I mean, we do a lot of classes, and we work with the Alzheimer's Association now, and so it's a topic that's so relevant to our community. So I'm really positive news to hear something like that happening. So Eric, just piggybacking on that topic on staying through companies as you invest when things go up and down, I think we tend to look at everything going up, and we hear stories about it. But as an impact investor, what's your mandate? Like, how do you support companies when things are not working out too?
So that's an important thing. When we talk to companies that are about to go public from being smaller private companies, they say, well, we're really concerned because we know we're going to attract some investors, but they're probably all going to be hedge funds that just want to flip their holdings the moment it goes public. And they're not going to be the kind of investors that will stick with us for years, that will, well, they don't say it this way, that will hold our hand when we have a problem, that can teach us better how to raise funding over time, who we might partner with. And so they're very excited to have us if we can be a cornerstone investor, because we're long-term and because we're always thinking about what we can do that makes them more impactful. And it's funny when we say that, because impactful and profitable in our companies are almost always aligned. We'll do things like, here's another story. We have a couple of companies that do education and training in the US online. Great companies, but they're US only. We also have an investment in a job site across all of Asia and Australia. And what they don't have is the content to elevate the skills of their job seekers. And what the US companies don't have is an Asian market. So we brought them together so that they could, I would say the word, be more impactful, be more impactful to everyone, but it meant for all of them that they had the chance to be more profitable too. And it usually does go hand in hand like that.
Thanks. That's interesting. And we'd love to learn a little bit even about microfinance, right? I think people hear about microfinance and impact investing. What do you do there, and how can ordinary people participate in it through your fund?
Well, it's a significant part of the fund. 20% of the fund is financial and digital inclusion. So that might be, well, I'll tell you what it is. It includes, in the US, investments for micro and small enterprises so that they can be in the financial system, so that they have more connection through to financial services, simple financial services, or business services like doing their boring stuff, like doing their payroll and doing their taxes and all that, but to have the same kind of access as the big guys do at low cost. Then at the same time, we have an investment in a Kenyan telecom company that does mobile money, mobile credit. So it's hard to imagine, but this is how, if you live in a city, you send money back to the village. And the village, your relatives in the village always need money. In Rwanda, where I used to live, it's nicely paired. There's always someone in the village who's sick, right? You need to send them money. But in Rwanda, they also have a startup that does medical drones. So they'll bring the medicine out to the village and drop it by parachute into the little village if you order it. All these things come together in beautiful ways. And then there's the traditional kind of microfinancing that we support. In particular, there's a very large bank, $45 billion bank in Indonesia. Of course, Indonesia is a country of a couple 100 million people. But what they figured out is how to have their agents, they can't do brick and mortar banks everywhere, but how to have their agents across 6,000 islands across the archipelago of Indonesia, so that they can make these microloans everywhere. And these are loans, they start at like $15. But for someone who doesn't have the capital to start a small business selling water or straw hats on the beach, whatever it may be, that's the fortune that they need to be able to start. And so you have that both in the developing world, but you have that for small enterprises in the developed world. And that's really an exciting range of possibilities for making people able to advance themselves.
Oh, thanks for sharing that. These are really cool stories. I know I mean, this kind of inspired me to start Get Set Up too. But Eric, for a lot of people, how do they participate in it, right? Because like you said, usually investors with a couple of $1 million or do it. So how have you changed that? Like, how have you made investing in these, interesting, impactful companies more affordable and accessible to anybody in the market today?
Well, the kind of investment that is in the private markets is very regulated. So it means that you have to have that huge pile of money to be able to do it. And it also means that it's typically locked up for 5 or 7 years or longer. And that's just untenable for most people. But what we're doing is plain vanilla mutual funds. So anyone can go to their, I won't name them, but to whatever your savings place is, and for almost nothing, you can invest in this, and you get an impact report that describes what all these exciting things we're investing in. And you can also see the history. We have a great history of financial results too. But so you get both of those, the financial and the impact results, so that you can really understand what's so different. But it's very, very accessible. And for the I count myself as one. For the nerds among us, if you really want to know what the impact is and measure it in all sorts of manner, you can see how many people were educated and how we tracked what that did to their lives, and how many lives were saved through medicines or other medical interventions, how many people got jobs and what those jobs did to their future prospects. So there's so much detail now that you can see from those simple investments.
Yeah, no, thanks. So Eric, why did you, or what got you to doing this? Because, you could have chosen a very traditional path of either retiring or just investing like regular investors. I know from all our conversations for years, actually now almost 6 years, you had this vision of wanting to do good and combine it with your expertise. So like, what got you here and why are you so passionate about it?
It reminds me of something at the old place I used to work, where I said to a friend, it's kind of a kidding around thing, I need to have something on my headstone that's better than he made more money than he expected to. And my friend mentioned it to one of the partners there, and he said, "Oh, that sounds pretty good." And, dying with more money is really not the goal, right? And for me, I thought about, when I was in my late 50s, I thought, well, I'm doing the regular investment, maybe I'll play that out and then I'm done. And then I discovered impact investing, which didn't really exist. And it's been such an exciting, rejuvenating thing for me that I'm 62 now. I don't think about, I think about, I guess I'll have to retire in a decade or so, but who knows? Because it's all about whether you get back so much energy from what you're doing that it makes it worth it. And I'll also tell you, an inspiring story for me was there was a woman I knew even 25 years ago in Rwanda, an American woman who lived there for forever, ran a plantation on a mountain. Roskar, a wonderful woman. She's been written about a lot, but she was there when the genocide happened. So that's 20 years ago. And so she was evacuated. She came back. She was 74 then. Sorry. She was 74 when I first met her. She was 84. She's evacuated from her plantation. She comes back, and it turns out there are 250 orphans because of the genocide living right by her and living in terrible conditions. So at 84, she said, okay, I'll establish an orphanage. And she ran that orphanage until the time she died when she was 94. But I thought, we all think about, 60s, time to retire, time not to be active. And here she is starting a whole new institution. It made me think, I should shut up and not think about that this is the end. It could be just the beginning for a lot more decades. And, it all depends on whether you have the health and strength and mental acuity for that. But even if you're more limited than that, you may have one or two of those to be able to do something that gives you energy, purpose, inspiration. So I hope that I do this as long as I can do this.
No, thanks for sharing that story, Eric. So in terms of, a lot of people, even, as they're planning the best years of their life, let's not call it retirement, they think about volunteering, they think about giving back in different ways. How are you giving back? I know you've done this impact investing thing, but how are you sort of seeing that as a way of giving back to society or giving back for the next generation?
Well, for me, there are few parts to it. One is the results of the companies that we invest in and the fact of trying to make them more impactful. The second is we're very focused at BlackRock on achieving financial well-being for the people who invest in our funds. And I'd say the third thing that really moves me is how many, especially younger people in their 20s, 30s, even 40s, say, I want to be an impact investor. I mean, it's the sort of hottest topic around investment, that young people want to figure out how they can have a career and purpose. We have a 25-year-old on my team. And when we hired her into the team, she had said to me before that, I always wanted to be an impact investor. And I really laughed because at 25, since she was a sentient human being, there was impact investing. So she could actually say, honestly, I always wanted to be an impact investor. When I was 20, it didn't exist. It took a couple more decades. I could never have hoped for something like this. I did development economics, which was sort of a proto version of that. But this is an exciting thing, and mentoring these people for a career in something that didn't exist before is thrilling to me.
Nice. So with, you spoke a little bit about your clients, and I'm assuming that everybody in the world can participate in BlackRock's impact fund, but global impact fund. But can you tell us a little bit more about who your clients are typically, right? Who cares about impact? Is it more younger millennials? Is it big institutions?
So investing is mostly institutional, but so we have lots of foundations, we have lots of school endowments, but we have lots of insurance companies. And the reason I mention that in particular is because the other thing we have, and it comes from the same purpose, is we have lots of retirement funds, because insurance companies like retirement funds have to think really long term. We're long-term investors. Many of our investments won't play out for several years. So the fact of that long-termism is really a great match to what people were thinking about. I'm saving for my retirement, for those decades of retirement. I'm an insurance company. I have to have our reserves that will be there when needed decades from now. So it's really anyone who has more of a long-term mindset. We get a lot of family offices, as you can imagine, wealthy families who are thinking, how do I do something? We've earned all this money. How do I make something that means a lot to the next generation and the generations after that? There's even a movement for some wealthy families to put their money 100% into different impact investments because they got enough. They need to make it work in a direction that matters. And so when we go into an investment, we're always looking at it as at least a 5-year holding. Sometimes it's longer. From when we first launched this formally, which was 7-8 years ago, about half the fund is the same companies that we owned back then. We might have owned more or less of it over time, but it's a way that we really get to know our managements of the companies, so that we become trusted collaborators with them.
Nice. Thanks for that. So Eric, what lessons have you learned so far about impact investing that you can share with our community? Well, maybe let me frame it this way. What are, this is a buzzword today, like what is real impact investing, and what they should not do?
Yeah. So the standards for impact investing are emerging. So there are what anyone wanting to invest in something that's called an impact fund needs to do is what I refer to as look under the hood. And that means not just what is published, but you should be able to get all of the holdings. And what you'll see sometimes, you'll see top 10 lists, and top 10 looks kind of good, like the companies I talked about. And then you look underneath, and they have credit card companies, and they have chocolate makers. I mean, they'll say, we own this chocolate maker because they're producing food, and food's important, right? Really, you will see companies that are kind of appalling, social networks that do not sound like they're solving the great world problems. You really have to look at it to see if it's authentic, and only a few are. And that's the difference. It means for everybody on this call, you need to do a little bit of homework to be sure it is what it says it is. It has become a buzzword, as you said.
Yeah. No, that's great. I know we've been getting some questions on chat, and I have a few more coming in on Facebook. So actually, maybe we'll take the questions on chat and keep this more fluid, and then come to the few that I have. So Eric, there's a interesting question here on contrast between like direct donations to organizations versus investing. Like, how is it different? Like putting money in an impact fund versus giving money through donations.
The reality is it takes all of this, right? I mean, I do philanthropic giving as well as doing impact investing. And there's some purposes for which philanthropy is the only direction. I mean, if you're going to support public schools, if you're going to support things politically, that's all going to be different from impact investing. But one of the things I realized is that when you have companies that are focused on efficiency and tracking key performance indicators, all that kind of thing, you can be a little bit more confident that you'll get the results. I mean, all too often, there are measures of which philanthropies are efficient. And I encourage everybody similarly to look under the hood when you give donations. But this is a discipline that is more efficient for a lot of purposes. What I do is I give money for things where the private markets don't really work. If you wanted to give money to, absolute poorest people to get them water. That might not be a market proposition. You know, the real base of the pyramid sometimes is not a market proposition. Although you all on the call should know that Neil created an education program for some of the poorest of the poor in India who were able, because there was no education system, of course they had to pay for education, and happily, like some of the things I was speaking about, it's offered at a really low cost that even a poor person in India can afford. So there, I think what we've learned over the last 10, 15 years is that private players can be inventive and take care of so much of the world's problems, leaving the absolute hard to reach problems for multilateral banks and development agencies and philanthropy and all that. So it's great to give charity where charity is the only thing that is the answer, I think.
Yeah, that's a good point, Eric, because I think of a lot of now companies that probably would have been charities in the past. This is for Alan who asked this question, but they would have set up as a non-profit, and they still have overheads of running the operations and actually doing good because they have certain goals. And we've found that, at least in the last couple of years, that organizations have tried to solve the same problem but run more efficiently. And so sometimes it's actually better to invest in those companies because you at least know that they are running it efficiently. They are tracking their performance, and so it's actually, the lines are getting even more blurred. But for some causes, it's really hard to invest in a company because there are no companies solving those problems, right? So I think in a way, if you want to leave a legacy behind with clean energy or with affordable housing, you may be better off giving it to a company it's probably well run and that is actually hitting those goals, as well as being sustainable, so they don't have to depend on your donation dollars when they dry up.
I'll tell you a story that was insightful to me. I thought it's an evolution. People are learning about how the private sector can do this. When I was exploring moving from traditional finance, I was looking at different social enterprises like your education company, but in the US. And I went to an open house of one here in the Bay Area. And what they do is they work with Stanford to create very low cost incubators for clinics around the world. So they sell this incubator at 1/10 the cost of a conventional incubator, making access really much greater. And they were going through their spiel and they explained, I thought they were going to tell me how many thousands or hundreds of thousands they produce. And they said, we make 100 and something a year. I said, what? Why? This is a wonderful thing. Why don't you produce more? It's 1/10 the cost. Why don't you produce more and change the world? And they said, well, we don't make enough to cover our costs. We need to raise money to be able to sell these. And I said, if you sold it at 1/7 the cost, all those clinics would be happy as anything to receive it. And you could cover your costs and you could do it like a business. But they were sort of stuck in between this charity idea and a commercial idea. And I think that's what 10 years ago looked like. But today people get that there are, that both with digitization and the internet and all the advances we've made, there are so many ways that you can do both things, that it can be a real enterprise that solves these problems, but runs efficiently and profitably.
No, that's really true. We had a question from Matt Greenfield, who's also an investor. Matt asked, when a company has a mix of both positive and negative impacts, like solar panel companies that have a manufacturing process that creates a lot of pollution, what sort of criteria or metrics do you apply while picking these?
So I mentioned that there's standards that are developing. And happily, there are a couple of structures that are becoming globally accepted for what we call managing or measuring impact. And what they include there is net impact. So it's always, that's included in the risk of the proposition. So you look at what they're doing, who it's for, how big is that impact, and what's the downside. And so you might well see one renewable company that's doing the same thing without the downside, and then another that has that is either has a process that has a negative attribute to it, or that is careless about that kind of environmental impact or social impact, whatever it may be. And so if you, now that we can measure it correctly, you can have an apples to apples comparison between two solutions. And we track all of that, and we report on all of that annually.
Nice. Thanks. So Diana had a question around, I think way back in our conversation, that this sounded like Grameen Bank, right? Some of your investments, microfinance. So beyond impact, what's the financial return that people get if they invest in your fund? I know last year was a great year, or this year was a great year, but what can people expect? Or can you give us some examples of numbers or returns that people see?
Well, last year was something like a 70% return. We beat the market by like 20 something percent. We don't do that usually. We're designed to beat the markets by about 4%. That's what we're structured for. And it's funny, we don't invest in Grameen Bank, which is not really the same kind of commercial offering, but they have something we have invested in the past in is Grameen Phone, which is a collaboration between Grameen Bank and a European telecom company. And what they do, it's kind of like what I described about the microfinance, but they're committed to access to telecom services and data and all. And the way they did it is they have what they call the phone ladies. They provide a small income for women. In the developing world, it's often that you can only trust the women to handle money and to do business. And so they have hundreds of thousands of these women who go to the villages, and they bring they go back to the village, and their phone is their business, and they're like the payphone of their town, of their village. And so they will sell phone services for a small markup so that everybody gets that kind of access. And it's the way that Grameen Phone has gotten to the furthest corners of Bangladesh that you would never imagine was possible. And they do it profitably. And they grow 8% a year, and they pay a 6% dividend. And it's a tremendous company. A little bit off the beaten path.
Yeah, these companies sound really interesting, right? Because most of us, including me, I'd never heard of, first of all, these companies. Second, just how I could invest in them, because they seem to be both offering a great return. I mean, much safer return than a lot of tech companies here in the Bay Area, but also quite measurable good in the world. So for a lot of our audience here and who probably will watch this later, what are some very practical steps that they can take to, if they're interested in investing in something like this? Like, how does one go about doing it? Like, who do I call? Where do I go search? Like, how does this work?
Well, if anybody has an IRA or or savings in a brokerage, you can ask them about what impact investment options they have. And they exist. There aren't too many. And as I said, you should always look under the hood, figure out what it really invests in. But these days, any mainstream brokerage, or I wasn't going to mention names. I don't know what you call a Schwab or a Fidelity or those places, but any of those would be able to point you in the direction of impact funds.
And is impact, if I call my broker, is impact different from ESG? Because we hear a lot of ESG out there.
Yeah. So ESG is about good corporate behavior. So it's about how any company behaves. It could be a company that makes soft drinks, right? There are soft drink makers that are great ESG companies. There's an alcohol maker that is a great ESG company, that they're good with water, they're good with their employees, all that kind of thing. But we're focused on what the company does, what their goods and services are. So not how they operate. And we also focus on ESG, but that's a secondary thing. Of course, our companies can't be doing these nefarious environmental, social, or governance things. But really, what's different about impact is that it's on what companies make and what those things that they make do for the world.
Yeah. No.
ESG is becoming ubiquitous. It's becoming, if you're investing in a fund and they can't tell you what their standards are for ESG, they're not going to make it commercially. Every fund has to be doing ESG. We're all doing that, but impact is a different animal.
Yeah. No, thanks for clarifying that, because I think I guess it's marketed to the whole world. Like ESG is also, you're doing good because it has something to do with the environment. And that kind of leads me to this question George has asked. What has your fund prioritized in terms of world needs, right? Is it climate change, hunger, health, democracy, education? Like what do you all sort of prioritize?
So we're broad, and the way we talk about it is people and planet. So on the environmental side, on the planet side, we're not particularly worried about whose needs we're meeting. We want to solve the problem of pollution for everybody. We want to have renewables for everybody. We are concerned about water technology, electrification, digitization that makes the world more efficient and less energy hungry. Then on the people side, most of that is about access. So we talk about we do education and job search, and we're not going to invest in elite schools. We're going to invest in the schools that serve unmet needs. Similarly, for housing, we don't do fancy housing. We do affordable housing. But then it gets a little more. And in financial and digital inclusion, by definition, it's about inclusion. With public health, which is another part, another 20% of our fund, we call it public health rather than healthcare because we only do three things. We are focused on bringing down the cost of healthcare for everybody, and then bringing new public health solutions for everybody, and then finally bring access to underserved. So it's more of a mixed story, but that's what we focused on primarily, and those are really shorthand descriptions, but it's quite broad.
Yeah, for those, I know Carol and Carolyn and George, I think we'll send out a link to some of Eric's stuff in our class notes, so you can go see it in detail and sort of like how they think about it. I know firsthand because I was helping Eric way back when think through this process, and I think we were connecting it to the Sustainable Development Goals, right, Eric? Is that still true? Like how you think about classifying what you invest in?
So here's a problem, yes, but the sustainable goals are wonderful for mobilizing money and attention and governments and philanthropy, but they're not defined enough. And so we talk about the terms impact washing and greenwashing. So the goals say water and sanitation. That's one of the goals. Well, it doesn't say for whom, and you know, you could invest in the water company that's bringing water to your city in the United States, just as it always has. But in fact, what they're really talking about and underlying, you can get this information, is bringing new water technologies that reduce waste, that improve the quality of our water. And so we use their industry specific standards that we've adhered to that are actually more effective than the UN SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. But for a rough approximation, they point you in the right direction. I mean, let me be a little clear about why that's not exactly what we do. For instance, there's a UN Sustainable Development Goal, which is gender equality. Okay, well, I can promise you, there aren't companies solving for gender inequality. That's not what companies do. But what do companies do? They educate girls. They do women's health solutions. They do micro lending to women. That's how a company does it. And so it's not exactly aligned with what companies are. So you have to be careful about that as a measurement. And it's kind of a shorthand. If you look up any oil company in the world, they will show you how many SDGs they are helping with. I have my doubts.
Yeah, for those who don't know, the United Nations actually publishes sustainable development goals. I think every couple of, like, every decade, I think so. Or how often is that, Eric?
They did it once in 2015, and
Yeah,
it's aimed to 2030 goals,
yeah,
which
yeah,
which won't be reached, just like the Paris Climate Accord goals won't be reached. But
yeah,
it's an inspiration. It's a way of focusing.
yeah. And I think those goals, I remember even when I was doing like early childhood education, that those goals kind of like help, philanthropies, whether it's investments. A lot of people sort of align with this vision of what we want to achieve. And whether you're a nonprofit, you're a company, whether you're a social enterprise, you all kind of tie your outcome or of your business to one of those, because it helps sort of clarify your role in the world. So you can look them up. The United Nations puts it up every year, every couple of years, and it's actually very broad. But thanks for clarifying, like how you think about it. So Eric, I know we have about 10 minutes left, so I want to ask the sort of fun part of the fun questions, because I told everybody in the email that you were sort of a big inspiration for me to start Get Set Up, and actually not because of all your financial mumbo jumbo that you do and positive change in the world, but really that what I found interesting is that at a stage in your life where a lot of people think about volunteering, starting something uh, uh, less risky, you actually decided to take up something very entrepreneurial. And I know you were going through this. I think it took you a year or two to figure out what you want to do next and how you want to do next. So, what lessons did you learn by making this big change, and like how did you get to this point, right? Like what helped you get to this clarity of defining your next best phase of your life?
I think the most important thing is to realize that nothing uh, is necessarily permanent. That you should test things, and so that's like when I talk about meeting with the social enterprises, trying to figure out if that was for me. There were a number of them, and I learned a lot along the way. And I thought about many different processes. There's a great book that was helpful to me, which is called Designing Your Life, which is a book with exercises in it to figure out what you really want from life, what you really want from your career. It was mind opening for me. And you realize that nothing's irreversible. Go try something, or think hard about what you want to do and go through different iterations, tweak it a little bit. And that's where I got to this. And the other thing for me is, in thinking about doing something good for the world, this is not to knock volunteering at a soup kitchen, but I'm not a chef. Um, you know, it's great to find the thing you can do that is not just something that everyone can do, but something that you have some skill in. So if you're a teacher, then you might think about how you can tutor or teach. If you're a if if you're a lawyer and you're retired and you don't want to be a lawyer, but you might be able to give people advice. If you're in the financial area, you might be able to help people with financial literacy. How wonderful it is to bring both of those things together so that your philanthropic work is that much more elevated and impactful.
Nice. No, and I think that was kind of why, for me, that was inspiring, because I always looked at you and said, oh, there's just so many more people who are much cooler. They have so much more wisdom, knowledge, and life experience. And so why don't we build a platform like Get Set Up, where, we have retired teachers, we have like, entrepreneurs. I know Michael's here, but so many inspiring people. Everybody on Get Set Up platform is just inspiring, because you've lived through so many ups and downs in lives. You have so many stories. And so I see people come on the platform and they use their skill to actually help others. And now they're helping people all over the world. And so I think it stemmed from seeing your journey and trying to figure out how you want to put your finance skills and your sort of development skills, from your early teenage or early 20s together, and saying, hey, I don't have to do what everybody else is doing. I can take what is truly unique to me, and that can be anything, right? Like, I'm an engineer and I want to use my engineering skills once I retire to do something, maybe build a solar panel, or build a website and, share wisdom on it. So I think that was actually the big aha, was there's so many talented and wonderful people in the world. Everybody has unique skills, and we just wanted to create a place for people to come and share it. And I want to say thank you, because you were part of that inspiration, and now a lot of people on Get Set Up enjoy that. Just wanted to point that out. Eric, before you know, in terms of, before we sort of end this, I know we have 5 minutes. What would be sort of your last parting advice to our community? You know a lot about our community from hearing from me and, like, from today's talk, but what would be an advice to people as to look forward to in life, right? Like, as people are living longer, people are being more healthier. They like, how do they think about their life moving forward?
So I didn't think about this question, but I think it stands out pretty clearly because of this Get Set Up community, is that it's very hard to create whatever is next in isolation. I think you need, like you and I have brainstormed about what you're doing and what I'm doing. I think you need that. And as you're older, it might be not as obvious who you connect to get related ideas, or to have somebody come out with a completely different perspective to critique what you're doing. So I think using this kind of community is a possible way that one can explore how to, if you want, design your life, design your next stage. So I know my parents thought about this kind of thing, and they were lost for an approach. How would I even think about that? And now digitally, we can be connected to so many people who might be resources for us. And so that's something to really take advantage of.
Yeah. No, thanks for that. And actually, that's a great sort of segue to our end, right? Because I wouldn't have come up with this idea if I didn't have like you and other people to brainstorm it. And I think this is just for everyone on Get Set Up, that the community, where we have guides, who are photographers and who love travel, and, like, we're seeing them come together and come up with really unique ideas. And I think We have teachers and who love music, and they are now DJing on the platform. And I think a lot of creativity um, comes when you actually can share with each other what your ideas are and like get critique, like you said, brainstorm it. I think in isolation, sometimes we get stuck thinking it's not possible. Maybe I can't do it. Um, but that happens to everyone, right? It doesn't matter what age you are, what phase you're in your life you are, what path you're taking. I think the power of sort of having a community that is actually more empathetic, more patient, and is willing to sort of work with you, I think it helps us actually create wonderful things. And I think about what you have created with the global impact, and I think I'm hoping that Get Set Up is making a positive change in people's life. I think I'd love to encourage everybody watching, like if you have ideas, find someone on Get Set Up, and who knows, you might create something that changes the world. So it's never too late.
I'm going to grab a last minute to tell a little story that inspired me also. Lots of inspiration here. I went to a competition at Oxford University of young social entrepreneurs who were trying to figure out their idea that they were going to work on. So I was sitting in one of those business school amphitheaters, and these two guys rolled up in their wheelchairs. They were paraplegic, and they roll up to the front of the stage, and they turn toward us, and they say together, "We love to travel," which is the most unlikely thing when you see them. And then on the screen behind them comes up an image of the two of them in their wheelchairs at some tropical location. And they do travel, and they figured out a way to do it. And what they did was they did a crowdsourcing site so that if you're disabled, you can share information about where there's accessibility into hotels and restaurants and places you would want to go to. It turned out it got bought by TripAdvisor, another one of the travel sites, for a lot of money. And it's been turned into something that for both people with disability and seniors is a very differentiated social enterprise. But such a great thing. They came together. They were supported by their network of people who suggested how they might put the business together. And then the fact that there were the two of them made it possible for them to brainstorm this thing into a great business. I just loved it.
Oh, that's so cool. Do you know the name of the company? Is it there?
Well, no, because it was bought by the bigger tech company eventually.
Awesome. No, this is a really great end and a lovely story, because I do think that there's just so many opportunities for in this space to solve, and I think seniors have all the wisdom and insights to solve it. Nobody else can. So I think this is a great end to our conversation, Eric. Thank you for giving your time, and I'm sure people enjoyed learning a little bit about impact investing and probably getting inspired by your journey. So thank you again. And for everyone who participated, welcome to our community. If this is your first time here, but if you're a regular, I'm sure all of you have amazing talents. I think that, I've said this before, our community is growing. We have amazing speakers. We have ambassadors. We have guides come from different walks of life, and they teach classes. They host social hours. We encourage you. I mean, if you have a skill, you have a talent, please come on. We can help you host something on Get Set Up, because everybody is, a rock star in our world. So yes, we have a community. We'll send you some notes. And we have some actually fabulous speakers coming up after Eric. We have Pete Souza, who is the photographer for both President Reagan and President Obama, who's going to be on Get Set Up, and some famous NBA players coming on. So please do come on board for the next guest speaker series. And I know we want to take a picture. So if few of y'all want to just wait back, we'll do a quick group picture. Just give me a couple of seconds.
Thank you for your inspiration, both of you gentlemen.
Thank
right,
you.
Thanks everyone for being here.
smile.
All right, so we'll take a group picture.
Great. One more, if everyone can just keep smiling. Thank you so much for this.
Yes. All right. Thank you, everyone. We'll send the pictures and notes. And